Are you an operations leader who is losing control of your performance? Do you think your problem's too big? Are you losing sleep? Are you stressed because you've got a big problem on hand, perhaps quality, efficiency, maybe the velocity of the products going through your shop floor? Well, stick around and we'll go through this. This is Leadership Unscripted. Yes, I do have some scripts below, but just some point forms and trying to go through my suggestions on how you tackle um, basically a large problem where you're trying to drive accountability down to the shop floor versus take this on your own. So one of the I guess to look at it, there's two ways to tackle this problem. You can do it from the bottom up. So if you got 100 people in your shop floor, you could come in really early. Hopefully it's not a 24/7 operation. Come in really early and basically go out and micromanage every single person on your shop floor. If you got 100 people and you're trying to spend 15 minutes a day, I'm not going to do the numbers, but let's say you're working 8 hours a week trying to manage and micromanage every single person's performance, trying to hold every single employee accountable. That's a ridiculous way to do it. That's a difficult way to try to do it. I know at times, and I've even done it on my own, where I've went down and tried to micromanage somebody's individual performance, but then that takes away from the other 99 people that are perhaps losing accountability. Obviously, some are self-driven, but the ones that aren't are losing accountability, and your focus is not against the other 99 people. So the bottom-up approach is a difficult way to manage. Another way to look at it is the looking down. So you're at the high level, 30 miles away, looking at this problem from a very far distance, looking at all sorts of data, not really having a good understanding of all the individual issues that you're facing, and trying to manage this yourself with an operation, let's say of 100, 200, whatever the size of your 10 people. If you've got a couple of subgroups, this is where things get interesting. My suggestion is you've got so basically this relates to if you have supervisors or team leads. So let's say you've got 10 supervisors of 100 people. They each have 10 people. You're paying your supervisors to do the job of supervising employees and being accountable for the performance of the employees. I think a lot of the time we as production managers, operation managers, directors, whatever your position is, you're not holding accountable those different leadership positions. Just like if my boss or your boss doesn't hold you accountable for your part of the pie and in what you're doing, then they're not doing their job as well. So, business owners or boards of directors are expecting that each person is accountable for their operation and therefore holding every employee right down to the shop floor accountable. Well, it's not easy to do that on either side of it. You've got the micromanagement side where you're managing 100 people, and you've got the side where you're trying to do it all on your own. Well, the suggestion I have for you today is basically subdividing the performance across your groups. So if you got 10 supervisors, they each have 10 employees. Well, starting to look at how to segregate the performance of each cell so that they each take a portion. You divide down what the targets and goals are going to be for each of those, so that when you roll it up and everybody's hitting their target, you're hitting your target. The whole operation is hitting their target as a team. This is a team effort, but everybody has an accountability and a responsibility. So you can't just not hold the team leads and supervisors or sub managers. You can't just not hold them accountable and not help them drive performance within their own work cells. So the first step is to understand what the problem is. So if the problem is, let's make it simple. Let's say it's the efficiency or the productivity of your work cell. Um, and your target is to be 100% efficient at the top level. Well, if each team's simply 10 people and they equally produce the same amount of work, then you could easily divide that down and everybody would have the same target of 100%. And when someone's not hitting their target, you could focus on that. So it's really understanding what the problem is. The second thing is, where's the data coming from? So is this data being manually entered? Is it now in a database, Excel database, somewhere that you have access to it? It's really understanding where the data is and that it's easy to get access to the data and it's easy to deal with the data. So that's a critical thing, is understanding where your data is coming from. The third step is segregating the data into the teams. So now you've got all your data, and how do you segregate that data down so that this team, let's say they work on this product, XYZ. Well, you want to make sure that they're getting measured on the product that they're producing. So being able to have a system in place where you're taking the labor transactions and you're coupling that with the output that they're generating, to be able to basically segregate and now look at the specific performance of that work. So that's really critical. You can do that in Excel, and the newer software out there is a big thing is Power BI. Again, it's probably been around for a long time. I would consider myself really experienced in Excel, Visual Basic, creating a lot of reports in Excel. But now I'm becoming more interested in Power BI, at how powerful it is to connect to your data and give you reports any which way you want. In my organization, I've decided to not spend too much time getting into the knowledge of how to create the Power BI because we have a development team. So if you have a development team, use them to your advantage to play around and try creating Power BI reports from your data so that you can, let's say you have your full data and you can filter down to select the supervisor and it shows the data specific to that supervisor. It's really powerful. Very, very interesting stuff. And if you're not as familiar, there's a billion applications out there and YouTube tutorials that can show you how to use Power BI. But if you're really interested in Excel, I can help you with that kind of stuff. So if you have any specific Excel questions or you're trying to create a report or do something special in Excel, even if it's Visual Basic stuff, I've done a ton of stuff for probably since around 2004 is when I really started getting into Excel. So I've created many different reports that connect into other files and stuff. I might be able to help you a bit. Again, not looking at, financial gain from this. Really, I'm always interested to, if I have time, to give somebody a hand with trying to maybe fix an Excel report or something. But the Power BI, sorry, you're on your own there. Hopefully you already know how to use it. You can go on YouTube, figure it out. It seems pretty easy. Or if you have an internal developer, use them to your advantage. So now that you've segregated the data, the fourth step is creating the goals. So you want to basically make sure that you've got goals that align to your top goal, and that you don't pick some, let's say your goal of efficiency is 100%. Meanwhile, you've given all of your departments 80% as their target. Well, if they're hitting their target of 80%, they're going to be happy. They're not really going to push much more. And then you're going to struggle to hit your target of 100% for your boss or whoever's holding you accountable to your targets. So you want to make sure your targets are set properly, your goals are set properly. It's really critical for that. And you always want to have like just a slight stretch goal. You want to set your goal so that if it's a weekly target, that 60, 70% of the time the department's hitting their goal, maybe 30% they're not. So you always want to keep adjusting that. Ideally, you want to keep raising it, um, as you always try to tackle competitive advantage against other outside companies that could be competing against you, and also inflation, inflationary costs. You always want to be driving performance in the upward direction. So that's a critical thing as well. You don't want to take, let's say you've got 10 let's say you've got 10 or two departments, and they each have a target of 100%. But one department is 10 employees and the other department is 90 employees. You don't want to take the average of those two departments and say, okay, the department with 10 employees had 100%, and the department with 90 employees, had 95%, and take the average of that, because it's really not going to be 97.5. It's going to be closer to 95 because that larger department had more of the meat of your overall target. That smaller department has a little bit of contribution to the overall target. So you have to make sure that you don't just take the averages of all the performance and roll up and say, oh, we're doing good. You actually have to individually add those, when you're talking efficiency, looking at the output over the input, adding all the outputs of the cells over the inputs of the cells, and that will give you your overall. So you want to look at the actual hours earned over your, or whatever output you have over your labor hours, if you're talking efficiency, not just averaging the actual percentage efficiency. I'm sure most of you know this, but I had to learn it at some point, and I'm sure everybody else had to learn it at some point, that you can't do that. So that's why I'm just passing it out there for those that may not have realized it's something very simple, but I just wanted to throw that out there. The fifth step, involving supervisors and a couple. So involving supervisors, the fifth step, involving supervisors and a couple of employees. So now that you've got all these things set up, you want to involve your supervisors, maybe one or two employees from each department, depending on how big the departments are. Get them together, say, this is what I want to do. These are the targets. This is the system. And get their feedback and do some tweaks. Take their feedback, tweak it a bit. It's better that maybe it's not perfectly how you want it, but if you can get it, 90% of what you want, and they get some input and they get some involvement in this, you're going to get more ownership from each of the departments, and they're going to take it on their own, and they're going to own it. And when you go and say, hey, we're not doing this anymore, in a year from now, they're going to say, no, this is how we do it. We can't change. So you always want to get input from everybody. That's how you get ownership. That's really critical. The sixth step, set the method. So step 6, set the method of the review and the cadence. So basically, is this going to be a weekly review? Are you going to review with them? Are you going to do a Gembo walk where once a week you walk with a couple of other managers to each of the work cells and you sort of review what the performance is? Maybe you have some of the employees reporting out some weeks to get employee engagement, and also that they're identifying the actions they're going to take to try to improve the performance. Don't micromanage actions. Let the departments choose their actions. If at all, if you can in any way, let them choose their actions. If the actions are effective, there'll be some benefit to it. If they're not effective, then you go back and say, okay, what can you do next? that wasn't effective. Let's try something else. It's about learning. So it's really important that you get buy-in, you you get the employees and the supervisors coming up with the actions and seeing if they're effective over the next few weeks. If they're not effective, they can try something else, brainstorm within their department. There's better buy-in when you do that. So don't micromanage actions, don't give them actions, let them choose their own actions. They're they're just as intelligent as you are. You know, you're in a different position than they are, but everybody's intelligent, at different levels. Maybe some people need help in certain things, but we all have different intellects in different areas. So don't micromanage the actions. So basically, those were some of the steps. Some of the things I have here are, with all of this implemented, you could create a flex budget. So let's say you apply this to other variables. So now you've got your department, you got your sub departments, they've got their own targets. You know the staff that work in each of those departments, that supports calculating the productivity, the output over input. Now you know how much output you're creating each day from each department. With that, you could start applying, okay, a quality metric. Okay, if your output is 100 widgets per day and you produced 100 widgets, you're allowed to have 10% scrap, let's say. So you're allowed to have 10 scrap. If you produce, with a flex budget, if you only produce 50 widgets today, you're only allowed 5 scrap. So that's now implementing a flex budget within that work cell that changes based on your output, as well adding tooling costs and consumable costs. If with 100 widgets of output, you're allowed $1,000 of consumable cost, then with 50 widgets, you're allowed $500 of consumable cost. So it's a changing flex budget, and it allows them to manage the business as their own. Another thing is, going back to the efficiency, is adding in some indirect labor. So let's say you have cleaning that happens in your department. You have some meetings. You have some training that's going on. So there's some indirect labor as part of that overall direct and indirect labor within that work cell. So now the supervisor is also managing their total labor. So if they produced 100 widgets, which was the target, and they were allowed, let's say, 10 indirect hours within their work cell for the day, and they know that today, at the start of the day, they're planning on producing 50 widgets. So they know if they keep all their staff within their work cell, they're going to be over if they're going to fail on their efficiency, and they're going to be over on their indirect costs. So then they can go to the other supervisor. Hey, do you need help over here? I can move 2 people over to your department to help you because I can't support them today. So then if they were actually understaffed for the current load of work they have, they could reduce their overtime, and they're taking on. Now you got these companies, these sub companies working together, and that's sort of like a flex budget. And it's a really smart way to manage your labor internally and not basically always micromanage all the movement of labor. So that was yeah, basically those were the areas I want to discuss based on driving performance down to the cell level, the work cell level. Once again, I'm trying to release a video just showing and giving some advice. If this is of interest to you, you want to get more of these videos popping up on your YouTube, subscribe, like this video. This will help me. I'm extremely small channel at this point, but my intent is just to help other operations and production managers in their career.